It's Friday, and so the BBE is live.
Nottingham ale, boys, Nottingham ale, no liquor on earth is like Nottingham ale. Nottingham ale, boys, Nottingham ale, no liquor on earth is like Nottingham ale. Nottingham ale, boys, Nottingham ale, no liquor on earth is like Nottingham ale. Nottingham ale, boys, Nottingham ale, no liquor on earth is like Nottingham ale.
And welcome to our show. If you're returning, good to see you again. If you're brand new or seeing this sometime in the future, thanks for tuning in. My name is Thomas Allen. I am one of the directors of the BBE, coming to you live from Chicago in my basement, where it is warmer than normal, which is great. And I can't wait to spend this hour with all of my friends and colleagues.
Absolutely. And I am Brandy Berry Benson, another one of the directors of the BBE. And I am thrilled that we have so many guests with us here today. Which is really awesome. We have Elliot Figg, who I've known we're old buds from University of North Texas. We were in Collegium together there. He is an extraordinary keyboardist, keyboard and composer, and hailing from New York. That's where he's streaming from now. We've also got Keith Collins he's actually in Tennessee right now, usually is living in Indiana, next to Bill Monroe country. But he is streaming from Tennessee, and we know each other from IU. So that is a great connection there, of course, and also UNT. So, it is the Baroque Orchestra is what keeps us all together here. And then finally, Phil Spray, we are super honored to have him join us again as well. He's from Indianapolis, and he is one of the core members of the Indianapolis Baroque Orchestra. And he's also joined BBE on a number of projects, as has Keith Collins. And is actually on the Gaelic album that the BBE did. So thank you guys for joining us today.
Oh, pleasure to be here.
Fantastic.
Cool. And so, as you might have guessed, we're doing a little Gaelic-themed BBE live today. So we're going to launch into why folk but Baroque and some, stories behind that, some of the main characters that you'll find in the 17th and 18th centuries from the Gaelic Isles here. And so, when we started thinking about a summer series, it was actually because BBE produced Scotland's first opera called The Gentle Shepherd. And that's where we really started to delve more into, well, let's do more programs that explore this intersection between folk music and Baroque music. And so thus was the start of that. And the first album that came out of that series was called A Gaelic Summer. And so as we were putting together this album and researching a lot of the music, we found that there were some major characters that had some great stories. They also made some awesome contributions musically speaking, but they also have some very fabulous stories about their lives as well. Launching into first, Turlough O'Carolan. So as it turns out, if you have been, at all researching any of this music, you will find a lot of blind harpists from this period. And Turlough O'Carolan is one of them. He wasn't blind all of his life, though. He was actually 18 years old when he became blind because of contracting smallpox. But nonetheless, that didn't slow him down at all. He toured all over Ireland for 50 years, playing all of his melodic compositions. He was, an accomplished composer, singer, and of course, as I mentioned, a harpist, and known by many as kind of the unspoken national composer of Ireland. He also did marry. So his wife's name was, in fact, Mary Maguire, which sounds like kind of a stage name to me. But they got married at 50 years old and still had 7 children. And so also O'Carolan was quite the poet. So he composed also many of the lyrics to his songs. And I found this fact really interesting, that he wasn't quite as proficient in English. So he only has one song that we know of written in English. So that is Turlough O'Carolan. So that'll be somebody we get more into later. The next composer, he's a bit later. His name is Edward Jones. No surprise, another blind harpist of the Isles there, and a bard and a collector of music. And so a bard was basically kind of like a professional storyteller, lyricist, historian. He's had every bard has a bard name, and so his bard name looks to me like Bard y Brennan. I'm sure that's not how it's spelled or pronounced, but it's spelled BARDD space Y space BRENIN. And what's cool about him, he actually became the harp master to the Prince of Wales and then performed for the first subscribed series. So those Bach and Abel concerts that were happening in London, he actually performed as part of those there. So very accomplished in his right. So we have actually 2 or 3 tracks on this album that are from his collections. And then finally, we've got James Oswald, who is one of the forerunners for Scottish music. In fact, Alan Ramsay, who was the librettist and poet for The Gentle Shepherd, loved James Oswald and practically worshipped him. When James Oswald left Edinburgh, Alan Ramsay lamented this fact and wrote an epistle for him, because he saw that James Oswald was helping him in his mission too, to raise the national stature of Scottish music from this kind of lowly self-image of folk music to a higher art. And so he was one of the forerunners for that. He was obviously born in Scotland. If you know about Scottish Baroque music, you know that they were highly collaborative with many Italians. And so James Oswald, of course, collaborated with Italians. Alan Ramsay collaborated with cellist Lorenzo Bacci, sorry for that mispronunciation, to create the Gentle Shepherd, actually. And so there's a lot of that intermingling of the Italians and the Scottish. And so what was cool about James Oswald is that he wasn't always known as James Oswald. He had a couple of different pen names or aliases, if you will. David Rizzio was one of them, and then Dotel Filio. So playing to that Italian was a very cool thing. So I mentioned, Alan Ramsay lamented his leave from Edinburgh, and so the reason he left was actually he went to London. He ended up eloping with his first wife. It might have had something to do with the fact that they got pregnant. I'm not sure, because they had their first child in 1742 and then didn't get married until 1744. And so, if let's say you did a Google search for James Oswald, because that's what we do Google searches on everything, you will probably find that he wrote the Caledonian Pocket Companion, or compiled 12 volumes of this together. Some of it is his own music, and some of it is just compilations of other melodies. And then he also had the Curious Collection of Scots Tunes, the Curious Collection, which is interesting. And then, of course, there is a very big minuet tradition in Scotland, and so he has a collection of minuets as well. One of the really cool collections that definitely should be checked out is called his Airs for the Seasons. There's about 96 compositions in that collection, each one named for a different flower or shrub and corresponding season to that plant. So a very cool thing. So these are the 3 guys you want to look out for as we do our BBE lives for the rest of this month in celebration of Gaelic music. And with that, we're going to take our guests now through a series of trivia games before we, then proceed to ask them all of their family secrets after the games are up. But Thomas, you want to take it away?
Yeah, and quick question for the guests. So I know, Phil, I'm kind of speaking for you because I know you've played some of this because you were on our Gaelic album. Keith and Elliot. Keith, I assume you've probably played some of these. Elliot, have you played some of these as well? Keith, either of you?
This music?
Yeah, for instance from some of these composers.
Yeah, actually, I just recorded an album with one of my groups called Macaris. We do only Scottish Baroque music, in fact. Did you know this before you asked me to be on the show?
I think Brandy did.
Well, okay, I didn't know about Macaris, but I knew you had done some other projects, though. So
yeah, well, we have one.
Beard. You have the red beard. That was another qualification for you.
Right, I definitely look the part.
Awesome. And Keith, you've played some of this before too, right?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I've been on here before as a sort of banjo player, dulcimer player, and then I've also, obviously I'm a bassoonist normally, but I also do Irish harp. So this is the wire-strung national instrument of Ireland. And so we don't have, of course, we have music from Turlough O'Carolan, but being blind, we don't have anything like a, manuscript tradition for him. We have to rely on other people to have published his works. And so as a harp player, we dig through all of these old publications trying to find clues about what the harpers were playing. And so I've played stuff from all of these guys.
Excellent. All right. Well, let's see if I can stump you all. But this is Phil will definitely be familiar with these because I pulled for my game Thomas's Revenge and Cap Doppelgangers. I pulled pieces or some of our recordings from the album. So the way that this game works for those at home that have never seen it is I will go to the next slide, and I actually wrote out questions for these instead of just let's identify this composer by what's being played. Instead, I'm going to ask questions about either the composer or the piece that we will listen to. You'll get 3 multiple choice options for what that could be. We'll listen to an excerpt from the recording that we did, and then I will reveal the answer after we've taken some stabs at it, and then also reveal my cat doppelganger, which is selected just basically on a whim, slightly related to what we're talking about, and sometimes not. So it kind of depends on how I felt at the time. So with that, your first of 2 questions is, in the original version of Beer, 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 also known as Charlie Mops or Ode to Charlie Mops, the 3 pubs mentioned were the Curtis Bar, the James's Pub, and the Hole in the Wall as well. Along which river were the pubs located? You got 3 options there, and here's your excerpt for thinking music, unless you already know it, but which could be the case.
The Galway Arms, Chief O'Neill, the Hole in the Wall as well. One thing you can be sure of, it's Charlie's beer they sell. So all you lads and lasses, at 11 o'clock you stop. For 5 short seconds, remember Charlie Mops. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He must have been an admiral, a sultan, or a king, and to his praises we shall always sing. Look what he has done for us, he's filled us up with cheer. God bless Charlie Mops, the man who invented beer, 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 tiddly beer.
All right, so which river do we think this was found on, or based on? Or sorry, yeah, which river? Which river? That is what we're talking about.
This is so funny because I actually don't know the answer.
Excellent.
The lyrics, and I was like, "Oh crap!" Anyway,
yeah, because in the way we did it, we changed, and it's not uncommon, right? We changed the name of the pubs to be the rivers, to be the pubs from Chicago. That just made sense for us. So that's why you've got what was it, like Martyrs or something. I think we played at Martyrs, so we changed it to Martyrs one time and things like that. So
fantastic. I don't know. Do either of you guys know? I don't.
I mean, I do, but like, do any of y'all?
Nottingham Ale.
Yeah.
I'd go with number 3.
Yeah, I was gonna guess one. I'm gonna guess 1.
okay, I'm gonna go with 3 as well.
Going. All right. Well, and Elliot's back. Elliot, good to see you again. No worries. Do you have a guess? We've got at least 1 for number 3, 2 for number 1. Was that correct, Brandy?
2 for number 3. I'm gonna go with number
2
3.
for number 3.
I will guess 1.
All right,
The
2.
Liffey.
All right. Well, guess what, y'all? It was actually the River Thames. Yes, which is a bit surprising, right? Because this is a very it's a big Irish people sing it a lot in Irish bars and stuff, but it's actually on the River Thames. So good. And so for my cat doppelganger, I decided to select this gentle fellow who might be found at any one of these 3 pubs after work. So I was like, I love doing the cat dog because you just type in the most random things and then just cat and then see what comes up. All right, awesome. I win. All right, well, the next one. Phil, sorry to disappoint you. I thought about doing that particular one, but I chose instead My Jolly Companion, which you may remember. My Jolly Companion comes out of Calliope or English Harmony, which is a collection from all sorts of composers. And actually, our little Bacchus down there in the corner is from one of the images in Calliope, cut out and then supplemented with some Gaelic things like a four-leaf clover and a Gaelic beaver. My Jolly Companion by Mr. Diggard. Yes, my Jolly Companion is by Mr. Diggard, is found in this collection, and it's a praise of merriment through the personification of Bacchus. However, my question is more mythological in nature, and I would like you to guess which of the following three options is one account describing Bacchus's birth. So, was he born from the thigh of Jupiter? What did he spring from a barrel of ale? Or did his mother conceive him by herself? And here is your excerpt to think that one over.
Ye glasses turn down, ye glasses turn down. He that trembles the most, a prince he will crown. We go. He that trembles the most, a prince he will crown.
Very nice.
Yes, and that's Dave on the plonk at the very bottom, which is really funny.
Yeah, I think that was right after a long lunch we did that, wasn't it?
Yeah, right.
Possibly. Excellent. All right. So, what do we think? Which one of these is one of the possibilities for Bacchus's birth? At least, and not referencing necessarily music. I know Phil will be familiar with one tune with that, but
Right. Man. I mean, we can acknowledge that none of these could actually happen in real life, right?
I knew a guy.
Don't we all? Yeah.
Just like thinking back to the movie Junior. No, just
Oh, for sakes. You know,
I mean, yeah, it seems too obvious, but I'm gonna go with two.
Okay, gotcha.
I was going to say 2 can't be it because it would have been wine rather than ale.
Bravo.
Good
point.
And I'm trying to think who was actually Bacchus's mother.
I can't remember. Yeah.
oh, yeah.
So I'm going to go with 1.
Yeah. I was kind of thinking 1 too, Elliot, because he was such a lech. I think, or Bacchus was supposed to be such a lech, or is that Pan? I don't remember.
I don't know.
I think Pan. I think Pan. Yeah, I think Pan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll go with 1 also.
So you got 3 1s. Keith, what's your wager?
I said 2.
You said 2. All right. So we got 3 1s and a 2. Theoretically, Keith could be correct because there is the Nottingham Ale song where in the first verse we know that it's absurd that anyone would think he didn't spring from a bottle or a barrel of Nottingham Ale. However, the mythology seems to suggest that he was in fact born from the thigh of Jupiter. So number 1 was correct. And I looked everywhere for an acceptable picture of him being birthed from the thigh of Jupiter. And I guess no artist could really capture what that would look like. Because I don't know how that happened. So clearly nobody else did. And therefore, this was the closest thing I could find. So there you go. Good job. Keith, we will give you a B for playing because you are in some respects correct. Very good. And my cat doppelganger is super duper cute. There's this video of like this couple
Yes.
who the guy does. Yes, you've seen the case with these 3 cats, and the premise of the video is the woman keeps coming and finding the guy with the cats. She's like, "What are you doing?" And the cats are like sleeping on her side of the bed, and here he's reading them blankets in his little blanket, or he's reading them stories on his blanket fort, and they just sit there with it, which is really funny. So he is a great dad, and those cats sprang from his thigh. So good job, everybody. I got you on number 1, but then number 2, I waffled a little bit, but that's okay. So good job, everybody. Brandy will take us through our second and final game.
All right, excellent. So for this one, usually mine is 2 truths and a lie. However, today is different. Now it's 2 lies and a truth. You're trying to.
Oh, I missed that. Sorry about that.
So you are trying to say which story is actually true. So I will read off 3 short stories. This is the perfect composer gossip. It's like sometimes you really just can't make this stuff up. All right. So number 1. Before Turlough O'Carolan met his beloved wife Mary, he was actually in lust with a teenager named Bridget. She was the schoolmaster's daughter of the school for the blind that he attended. Second story. While Edward Jones wasn't always great with money and greatly owed the Prince of Wales, he was in fact able to pay back those loans from the prince and was welcome to stay in his castle after all. And then James Oswald was also part of the Temple of Apollo, a secret society of composers who would gather together and make up pen names for each other. His alias was David Rizzio. So instead of which is the lie, which one is actually true? And now for a little thinking music.
I just thought, which one is true?
Yes, which one is true?
Okay, sorry, I totally blew that one. Okay, which is true?
Yeah.
Well, so friends, I wonder if number 1 is a lie, because would he have been going to school when he was 18? Maybe, but for a schoolmaster. So I don't know. Like, I'm wondering.
I mean, I know that he was in love with someone named Bridget, and he wrote 3 songs to her. I don't know that she was a schoolmaster's daughter, but like it was one of his first. I know that one of the songs that survives was one of his first songs that was ever preserved, and he wrote it fairly early on in his career, like in his 20s. So I suspect number 1 is correct, at least partially. I'll put it that way.
Yeah. Well, that's the problem. Brandy will change one thing, and then
I'll go with what Keith says.
But number 3 sounds good too, because we know that he did have an alias, right?
We have David Rizzio.
But I was gonna say David Rizzio. That sounds like
It's something on Netflix, I think.
Yeah, I'm banking that one's a lie because of the David Rizzio part.
Is that an old boyfriend of yours, Brandy?
Yes.
Oh.
I'm gonna. Okay, so I think I am gonna go with number 1 as the true statement. Yes, because I actually wonder if the Prince of Wales didn't let him stay in his castle. So,
Elliot.
So the last album that we just recorded with Macaris is all David Rizzio tunes, and so I should know whether that one is true or not, but I actually don't, because I didn't do the research on that album. But I'm going to go ahead and say number 3 is true.
Number 3 is true. Okay.
Right, cool. So we've got a vote for 3. How many votes for 1? 2 votes? 3 votes?
1 vote for 1.
Oh, okay. So 3 votes for 1. All right, cool. So it was actually number 1 is the true story. So I'll tell you what's false about each of these. So Edward Jones never paid back the Prince of Wales. James Oswald, he was a part of a secret society of composers, but their goal wasn't to make up pen names for each other. So that's the false part of that story. But number 1 is the true gossipy story of So great job, you guys.
Yay!
Yay. All right, next batch of stories here. Thomas Rosengrave, a composer and organist, following in his father's footsteps, had a thriving career as a performer and was a very accomplished improviser until that all came to a grinding halt when he fell in love with a fair maiden whose father would not let her marry a musician. Second story, the Scottish composer Alexander Munro seemed to have a mistaken identity as a Parisian according to public records. Turns out he is actually from France and not Scotland. And then the third story, Francesco Barsanti, though Italian, lived most of his life in Scotland. When he did return to London, he had been away so long that he lost his position in London's musical society and then was forced to become a violist in Handel's opera orchestra. So, which story is the true one? And now for a little thinking music.
It's funny the way that the question is kind of phrased. It just makes Handel's opera orchestra sound like such a like
Okay, I'll play.
D-class celebrity or something.
I thought it would be funny to word it like that, but anyway.
All right, we're looking for the
I'm gonna go.
The true one.
Yeah, we're looking for the true.
Which one is the truth?
I'm gonna bank on number C because of that reason. Number 3, I like that one, so that's my true.
Yeah. I'm gonna go with number 1.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, I'm kind of guessing here.
I'll go with number 3.
Then you go with number 3.
Yes,
All
yes,
right.
Elliot.
Half for number 1, half for number 3. So
Yes.
it's actually number 1 is the true one again.
Damn. Okay.
Yep. So in fact, and I think actually from what I was reading further that it did end happily. He ended up, or no, his didn't end happily. I'm thinking of somebody else's, but yeah. So he wasn't allowed to marry her because her family would not approve of being married to a musician. So Alexander Munro, he does have. So his life is not super well documented, but he definitely was not Parisian. And then the third one, so Barsanti, the false part of that story is that he did not live most of his life in Scotland. He only lived 8 years in Scotland, and then when he lived in London before that, and then when he returned in London, he did in fact lose his post in the music society there, and then actually did play viola in Handel's opera orchestra. So.
Cool.
All right. Yeah. And then let's go to this last and final set here. So, following the storyline with Barsanti. So Barsanti married a common girl named Jean, which would have been a happily ever after. However, this union made his young patron, Lady Erskine, very jealous with rage, and she pursued him more aggressively. This was the reason he had to move back to London. Second story, Robert Burns, the famous Scots bard, almost fled to Jamaica after heartbreak and near financial ruin. As a Hail Mary, he begged John Wilson to publish his first book of poems. It went viral in the 18th century sense, enough to keep him in Scotland. And then finally, the third story. Alan Ramsay, librettist and poet of the first Scottish opera, The Gentle Shepherd, collaborated with composer and cellist Lorenzo Bacchi to establish a new national music tradition. He created the first circulating library in Britain and took it upon himself to open more libraries in the continental Europe. So, which story is true? And now for a little thinking music.
So number 3 is kind of sketchy to me because I'm not sure about the library portions, especially the fullness of the library portions. I mean, a lot of the rest of it sounds good to me on the third one.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with 2. That sounds like something that would happen to Robert Burns.
And I remember there have been a few times over the past several episodes where Robert Burns and Jamaica kept coming up. So that one does seem plausible to me. And I feel like number one, the statement, this was the reason he had to move back to London, is probably the falsifying part of that. So I'm going to be with Keith and go with number two. Or number two, yeah. Number two is the truth.
Cool. All right, so we've got 2 votes for number 2. Phil, Elliot, what do you guys think?
Boy, don't have a clue. I love the Gentle Shepherd, so I'll go with number 3.
All right.
I'll also go with the Robert Burns statement.
Excellent. Well, very cool. Well, for those of y'all who guessed Robert Burns, you're indeed correct. That one was the true story. Yeah.
Yes.
Excellent. Barsanti did in fact marry Jean. They did go to London, but there's no indication that his patron ever got jealous of that. The third story there, so he did actually create the first circulating library in Britain, but not in the rest of Europe. So that was the false part.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, you guys survived all the trivia games, and so now let's get into some of all the gory stories, and your family heritage. For those of you who do have a Gaelic and/or Celtic family history, of course, you have to tell us now all of your offshore accounts and all that good stuff. But actually, and in all seriousness, we'd love to hear. We kind of alluded to this earlier in the show a little bit, but what was kind of your first encounters with folk tradition, whether it was with Irish Baroque, Scottish Baroque, or kind of talk about that journey a little bit for as an early musician, a period musician. When did you first encounter that? So whoever would like to jump in there first. Yeah.
I'll tell you a story from my family history that's not Gaelic at all, but it takes place in London in the 18th century.
Very cool.
One of my ancestors was James Figg, who is the first heavyweight boxing champion of the world.
Oh, really?
That's awesome.
He was a bare knuckle fighter, and you see him in all those illustrations by who was that famous illustrator who he drew the picture of the gin craze.
That guy. Cool.
Hogarth. Is it Hogarth?
Hogarth, thank you. James Hogarth, I think. Hogarth was a famous illustrator in 18th century London, and my ancestor appears in a few of his engravings.
Very cool. That's so awesome. Very, very cool. So that was your first intersection with Gaelic Baroque. Got it. That's
awesome. I didn't really grow up with any folk traditions, honestly. So my first exposure to Gaelic Baroque was when I made my first album with Macaris a few years back.
Nice.
Where did you grow up, Elliot?
In Dallas, Texas.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was when I was in college, I had a recorder consort that played at a Renaissance festival, and there was I met some people there who were into the Celtic early, Celtic or Gaelic music, and one of them was a harp player, and so I got interested in hearing what she had to say about like the music she was playing, and so then when I proceeded, getting into early music in my grad degree, I thought, well, I wonder what some of that harp music would have been like. I knew about Carolyn, and so I looked more about him and find out that the instruments that he played and the way that the old harpers in the Gaelic-speaking parts of Ireland and Scotland were quite different. And so then I decided, well, let's find out more. And then here I am, all these years later, with like 3 harps and all this other stuff. And sort of always finding out more and trying to dig in more. I have a group that's only done one concert, unfortunately, before the pandemic hit. It's called Ishal, and we did music from circa 1700 Scotland is a female poet named Sheila Snekepich, and her poems survive, and a few of them, the tunes survive. And so we're one of the first groups, as far as I know, to like make that meld of looking at from an early music standpoint, how these tunes have survived in manuscript, and then how her words survived, and trying to find out a way that they went together. It's been a lot of fun. Hopefully we'll do more soon.
Oh yeah. And, as I understand, you do have a harp with you.
I do, yeah. I've got my my copy of the circa 15th, 16th century Irish harp called the Castle Otway harp. It's big.
Oh wow, that is big.
Yeah.
Wow. Ooh, that is beautiful.
Yeah, oh, beautiful, beautiful.
Yeah.
Wow.
This was made by David Cordier in Minnesota, and it's a copy of the Castle Otway harp. And so it's made traditional construction. It's only 3 pieces of wood. So the harmonic curve here is 1 piece, and then the pillar here is another piece, and then the box here is 1 piece. It's carved out of. It's not glued up. It's carved out of a single trunk, like a log, and the back is just tapped on. So I can take this off if I need to. And then the strings are made of sterling silver in the base, and then brass throughout the rest. And it's we know that the original that this harp sort of represents here, the original was played at the 1792 Belfast Harpers Gathering.
Oh, very cool.
One of the last gatherings of the old harpers who played with the long nails and still had some of the old traditions.
Wow.
I'm super interested in all that. What's that?
Does it have the brays on it?
This one, no. The wire-strung harps did not have brays. Those were only for the gut and the horsehair-strung harp. So while the Gaelic harps, the harps in the Gaelic-speaking world were metal-strung for the most part, in Wales, in sort of the other Celtic language, it was horsehair and gut, and those had the brays on them for sure. And certainly,
Hey Keith, what's the?
Go ahead.
Oh no, I was gonna ask. Like, I know that sometimes, like the harps, the reason we have so few harps is because like there's like kind of a lifespan in terms of like the tension forces them to break, right? What's kind of the lifespan of that particular harp, or what could you expect the lifespan to be?
Sure. I mean, we don't know. We only have 3 actual medieval harps, and they all have substantial damage and repairs. And so the original that my harp is based on, the box is a replacement. It must have exploded at some point from the original, right? And then it was replaced.
You'd hate to be there for that.
We know from the surviving instrument that mine's based off, that the box was replaced about the year 1710. But the problem is the rest of the instrument doesn't match the other harps that were being made at that time, so it's believed to be earlier. Who knows? I mean, because so few survived, it's hard to say. But I think it's fair that. So I built one with the help of a harp builder. And I did not glue the box, or I did not carve the box. I glued it up out of like 4 pieces of wood, and it was great for about 10 years. And then the box did explode. In fact, the computer says there's about 800 pounds of pressure on the instrument from the harp, from the strings pulling, and that was with my small one. So this one's probably got about 1,000 pounds of pressure. And so,
wow,
it's who knows. Well, so far so good.
Yeah. Would you like strum a little bit, just to for viewers to just hear?
And then we should hear Phil's first experience too.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I'll be quick here. Sorry about the tuning, but you get the idea. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, it's a very different sound from a modern harp.
Oh, completely different. Yeah, you're playing with your nails, and because it rings for so long, you have to also, within your technique, you have to work in damping the strings to stop them. So you're not only sounding them, you're also stopping them from sounding. So it's like you're a harpsichord jack, but you're also, the damp as well.
Wow, that is cool. Very, very cool. Awesome.
Thanks, Phil.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, that's so
Yeah,
good.
all through college, I was a Scottish file, I guess you'd say. And by the time when I graduated college, I actually had a teaching job outside of Edinburgh. And so I went over there, and this was the time when all the strikes were going on in Britain, and got into Edinburgh middle of the night, and there were 2 taxis you could take. So I just went walking. And fate would have it that I didn't stay in Scotland very long. But it was true that during that time, I was suspected of being an escaped serial killer. Honest to goodness truth. Honest to goodness truth. And so, but I came back, but still loved everything Scottish. I started doing, viola da gamba and recorders and crumb horns and all that. Still always loved the Scottish things. And it was Bach and Beethoven that gave me the access to it in The Gentle Shepherd. That was a true baptism of Scottish music. I absolutely love, will never forget, and have loved it ever since.
Yeah.
And
Wait, can we go back to this whole serial killer thing? Can we go back to the serial killer thing? I didn't know about this. This is very interesting.
Yeah, well,
you realize years from now when you're in a music history book, like there'll be a nice little footnote or like a trivia series. You're like, was Phil Spray a serial killer? And
well, they suspected, but but haven't been allowed back to Scotland since. But
You just must have a doppelganger over there or something.
Yeah. Well, part of it was knocking on doors in the middle of the night in downtown Edinburgh. But you buy the whiskey, and I'll tell you the rest of the story.
Okay.
More to it.
Oh my God. Yeah, don't do like Beethoven did, right? That also got
But the Gentle Shepherd.
Speaking of knocking on doors in the middle of the night. Right.
Yeah.
Oh man.
So I'd love to hear, Elliot, tell us about this album that you guys put out a few years ago. Like, I'd love to hear more about this.
Well, the one that's available for listening now, it's on Spotify and everything. It's all classic, mainly German composers who wrote Scottish tunes or wrote music to Scottish tunes, and so we have a Beethoven cycle on there, and
Nice.
some Carl Maria von Weber, some Ignaz Pleyel, some Haydn. I think it's very cool stuff, and it was all new to me. And then the one we just recorded that we'll be releasing, who knows when, it's all David Rizzio tunes.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Very, very
And so mostly attributed to David Rizzio, who was dead by the time a lot of the music was written. So he became some kind of a, like Pergolesi did, where people were just attributing his name to Scottish tunes for some reason.
Why did you guys, or maybe, I don't know, what was the impetus behind doing a CD of Germans writing about Scottish music, other than the fact that they did actually a fair amount of it?
Yeah, well, that was the chosen theme. Kivi Kahn Lippmann is the guy who organizes these projects. He's great at digging up this stuff that nobody plays. We also did a Schubert song, by the way. So really cool stuff. I highly recommend you listen to it. And yeah, I don't know the genesis of our group, but that's what we do. It's all Scottish themed. And
so what kind of instruments do you use on it? Is it like piano and voice?
We had 2 forte pianos for that album. For the new one, we used harpsichord. Our singer Fiona Gillespie, she sang and also played the tin whistle on one of the Beethoven tunes. It's a really cool effect.
What's the name of the album?
It is called I can't remember.
Is that the truth though? It's like you so quickly move on to like, all right, the next thing. It's like, yeah, I remember doing whatever. Wait, what year? I keep a log of everything because there's just not, it's just.
But our group is called Macaris.
Cool. And if our viewers would like to find that, how would you spell? Can you give us the official spelling of that?
Makaris.
Excellent.
Keith, is y'all's work also on YouTube, or is it on somewhere for people to purchase, or is it just in our memories right now?
For right now, it's in the memories. I did have a live recording of our one outing. The quality is problematic even for getting it on YouTube, but I'm working on it. Hopefully, with COVID coming under control, I'll have more opportunities to get the band back together. But it was for this iteration, it was Peter Walker on pipes and a little bit of singing. Molly Quinn was our main singer. She was sort of the voice of this female, of this poetess from circa 1700s Gaelic Scotland. And then Tim MacDonald and his collaborator Jeremy for fiddle and cello. And it was just an absolute hoot to put together, finding all this music. And so, the three big competing instruments in Scotland right around 1700 were, harp, fiddle, and pipes. Ultimately, the harp would pretty much go extinct in Scotland. And then bagpipes would become sort of this ceremonial thing. And then the fiddle became sort of a more everyday kind of sound. But there's a fantastic poem about the competition between the three instruments. And so there's a poet who writes about this. Unfortunately, the original Gaelic poem is lost, but we have an English translation.
Oh, wow.
And so we based a good bit of the show around that, this competition between pipe, harp, and fiddle. And then we looked at that through the lens of this Gaelic poet, Shealas na Ceapach. She was at a time, living at a time when so much was changing for everybody in Gaelic society, not just the nobility, such as it was that was left, but also, English speakers in the lowlands, Gaelic speakers in the Highlands, and the whole 9 yards. So much had happened. There was the Act of Union, and then there was rebellion, and the couple of in the 1680s and 90s, there was the flight, the abdication of the king, which caused lots of problems for the Scots. Anyway, it was a really fun project to put together, which I hope to do more with in the coming year or two.
Nice, awesome.
Thanks.
And then Phil, how about you? I know because you had put together some with alchemy vials, and I know you guys have done some programs as well.
We did a William Byrd song with Esteli Gomez this last August, and put that on YouTube, and that was a lot of fun. But music hasn't happened much this year so far. So we're looking for things coming up. Michael Walker, countertenor from, him from Central City Opera, I think. He's in Denver. It's not UGrad. He came to me and he wants to do, it's a really good idea. We're calling it Deep River, American Spirituals My Mother Taught Me, with vials, with him singing and vials.
Oh, what a nice idea.
So that's going to be an alchemy concert next year. So I got to arrange that music for vials yet. But I'm really looking forward to that a lot.
Yeah. Oh, that's really cool.
Mm-hmm.
Very cool. And what have you guys, because of course anytime that you're looking at something that is mixing in the two, like the folk tradition and then the classical tradition of that time period, right? There's some of the considerations that you guys have found as well to kind of help preserve the folk aspect of that so that it doesn't get lost, whenever it is, you know what I'm saying? Like kind of whenever the two roads meet.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating question, and it almost seems like it has two opposite answers, I wonder. There are what the historians say that they did at the time, and then we say, okay, that's what folk music has to be at the time. But as Bart Kalkin has famously says early music wasn't that way, and I have to think folk music wasn't that way too. It's not here's what they did 100 years ago, so here's what we're going to do now. He said, it's like if I come to your house and I ask him, says, yo, Bart, you want something to drink? And he'll say, oh, sure, what do you have? Yeah, I'll have that. And he said, early music is very much that way. We have the luxury of choosing today what instruments we want to use. Because of transportation, we can do that. But back then, that option didn't exist nearly as much. It was who was there, what instruments had strings, who didn't have the plague, who wasn't in debtor's prison. And it was a little, all right, what can we put together right now to make this happen? So do you go with what history says? Do you go with what you have? I don't know. I think what sounds good, what communicates.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you think, Keith, Elliot? What are your thoughts on that as well?
Well, go ahead, Keith.
Sorry. For me, the issue, so much of the tradition is for the harp players was written down by people who didn't play the harp. or who were or who were interested in it for monetary reasons, right? Edward Bunting was the young organist that wrote down the tunes that he heard at the 1792 Belfast Harpers Gathering. And that's some of the only firsthand accounts of someone sitting in front of someone who was 100 years old, who had lived during O'Carolan's time and was alive, for Handel. And the guy is literally writing what he heard. But he wasn't doing it because he was curious. He was doing it because he thought, I can arrange these for the pianoforte and get paid. And so trying to reverse engineer that stuff into what we have written down and what that means. Luckily, we have Edward Bunting's notebooks, his field notebooks, where he was actually sitting in front of these old guys and a few women as well. And so we can sort of look at that as well. So there's a lot of, musicology-ish research involved in what I do anyway.
Yeah, for sure.
And getting paid, I think that's always at the key of it too.
Yeah.
You ever see these letters up in St. Paul, the Museum of Musical Instruments up in St. Paul, right on the square? And they have letters from like Liszt, Beethoven, Berlioz, handwritten letters, and they've translated. And I would say 3/4 of them are all talking about exactly the same thing. It's like such and such promised me this much money, but they didn't pay me. It's always coming down to money.
Yeah.
Some things never change. Elliot, what were you going to say?
I would say that the general approach we took with our first album was our singer was very well steeped in Irish folk music. She grew up with it, and she knew so many of the tunes by heart already, not knowing that Beethoven or Weber had set them, for instance.
Right.
So she essentially imposed her own training, or kind of what she grew up with, the style of singing these tunes, onto the classical settings. So that was our way of reimagining into a folk lens, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have two thoughts on that one. Like, and I think that's great. Like, the first thought is like, I think when I hear people sing some of this stuff, like the Beethoven settings or something like that, I always feel like they're very square, and I think that's because at least now a lot of the schools are teaching people you sing it like this, right? But you gotta wonder if Beethoven or Haydn or like some of these other composers would have approved and or preferred the sound and stuff of the Irish singer and the ornamentation and the approach to the song. So that's one thought. And the other one, kind of going off of what Keith was saying right there, it's actually, I think it was pretty profound, and it came from Ellen Hargis, because I was coaching with her for a while, and she had said, we have these treatises that are being written either by great teachers or in this case, like people who didn't play the harp, and they're always telling you what they don't like because somebody's doing it, but then that actually meant that people were doing it, and that actually meant that was in some ways maybe the performance practice of the time as well. So I just had those thoughts when you both were talking, and I think it was kind of interesting to think about what we're presuming to do when we sing these now.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Actually, what you touched on, Elliot, with Fiona was actually a lot of the feelings I had when we were doing our Appalachian album. So, because I grew up playing bluegrass music, and so part of me wanted to totally just go with what I had grown up with, and part of me really wanted to, and I think I wrestled with it, right? And I think it's a good wrestle to have, as far as like the accounts that you hear and things like that. But one other thing that really struck me, and I think Keith brought this up too, is with Edward Bunting. We have a version of that, right, in the Lomax family as they were collecting tunes here in the U.S. And, if they were to come and transcribe what the bluegrass community was doing in College Station, Texas, versus what the bluegrass community was doing in Illinois, or, in different parts of the Blue Ridge Mountains or whatever, they would have gotten very different transcriptions. And so even within the Appalachian regions, everybody, each community had their own kind of take. It used to be that how you sang or how you fiddled would identify what county you were from, in a way, just because things were, before things were just so globalized, right? And so having gone through all of that journey, and what I think I like most about folk music is that there's kind of this idea that a tune evolves through the ages and goes and visits different communities, and each community kind of gives its flavor to that tune for the time. Before then the tune moves on and is picked up by another community, and then that same community embraces that tune and makes it kind of their own as well. And I remember tunes like Flowers of Edinburgh, where we played those all the time, in bluegrass circles, and then finding that very tune in later 17th century, 18th century collections, and seeing all the different iterations, if you will, and then finding also that same tune in later collections too. If you trace different tunes from 18th century into the 19th century, even those collections take on the aesthetics of those times, and so then the ornamentations and the instrumentation and things would do that. It's also interesting too, some of our earliest documentation of some of the fiddle tunes here in the US come from George Knopf, who was a German immigrant. He came and he arranged all these tunes for forte piano, right? And so like in their natural state, so to speak, wouldn't have been played like they were written down, right? Mm-hmm. But you have all of these considerations that you are making as you're wrestling with this idea of like, how do I preserve the folk tradition while also in this kind of classical or period idiom. And anyway, and what you guys brought up were all the things that I also encountered as well, just as we were putting things together. I think, anybody who's trying to be as thoughtful as possible is going to encounter all these things, right? So I appreciate that you guys said that.
So that what you're doing when you do Flower of Edinburgh now, so maybe that will be remembered as the Chicago version.
Yeah, no, it would just be, I think, just remembered as like a version that I did, right? Because there's also a bunch of players in Chicago. There's, kind of a Chicago sound. It's interesting too, depending on where you are in the US. And I think this is also true of the Isles, right? It's like wherever area you were from, you also had kind of the batch of tunes that you played most often, right? And so then I think, because also what was interesting, right? You guys can all attest to this too. You find a tune and then one source says it could be from Ireland. Another says, well, it was published in London first, or maybe it was, picked up by a Scotsman and actually they heard it in a Dublin pub or whatever, and sometimes the origins, it's hard to really find exactly where it's from, right? Because of all these different interconnections. But I think also, that's kind of the beauty of it all, is that things traveled. The fact that we don't have it all documented pristinely or anything is actually okay, I think, and more true to the folk nature in that sense, in a way. I don't know if that makes sense, but those are kind of my feelings on it as well.
Yeah. Well, friends, do we have any parting thoughts? Because it's after 1 our time.
Yes.
After 2 some other people's time.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having us. This has
been fun.
Joy. It's a pleasure.
Actually, this was a lot of fun to be very focused on this topic and kind of talk through about everybody's work and their thoughts in this area. So that was a lot of fun. Thank you all for joining us.
So wonderful thing you're doing through the pandemic too. This is a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Oh yes, definitely. All right. Well, thank you all for being here. Thanks for everybody at home who is watching either through Facebook or YouTube. We are live most Fridays at 12 noon Central. We'll be back, I think, next week with another BBE Live, and hopefully we will have all of our friends Phil, Keith, and Elliot back on the show with us sometime soon. Thanks again, everybody, and we'll see y'all next week.
Nottingham Mail, boys, Nottingham Mail. No liquor on earth is like Nottingham Mail. Nottingham Mail, boys, Nottingham Mail. No liquor on earth is like Nottingham Mail.